long before stones stretched across mountains and deserts. Before watchtowers punctuated the horizon, northern China was a place of uncertainty. To the south lay fertile river valleys where early Chinese civilization took root. To the north extended vast grasslands, home to nomadic peoples whose mobility defied the settled logic of farming societies. These two worlds collided repeatedly. The farmers depended on fixed land and seasonal cycles. The nomads followed herds and open skies. Their encounters were shaped by trade, conflict, adaptation, and fear. The Great Wall did not begin as architecture. It began as anxiety. During the Zhou dynasty, China was not yet a unified empire. It consisted of competing states, each struggling to survive. Northern borders were fluid, poorly defined, and constantly tested by raids. Nomadic groups, such as the Rom-Indi, were not invaders in the modern sense. They were neighbors with different survival strategies. But to agrarian states, their speed and unpredictability felt terrifying. Villages were burned. Crops were taken. Populations were displaced. These experiences left a deep psychological imprint on early Chinese political thought. The first defensive walls were not imperial projects. They were local solutions. States such as Qi, Wei, Zhao, and Yan built earthen ramparts along vulnerable borders. These walls were made of packed soil, gravel, and wood. They followed terrain rather than imposing geometry. Their purpose was not total exclusion. They slowed movement, signaled boundaries, and bought time. A delay of hours could mean survival. Over time, walls became symbols of sovereignty. To wall land was to claim it. Chinese political philosophy developed alongside these defenses. Confucian thought emphasized harmony, hierarchy, and stability. Disorder was not merely dangerous. It was immoral. The northern frontier represented chaos made physical. Legalist thinkers, more pragmatic and severe, believed strong states required control, discipline, and punishment. Walls fit naturally into this worldview. Defense became morality. Protection became legitimacy. The geography of northern China amplified tension. The lowest plateau eroded easily, exposing settlements. River valleys offered access routes. Mountains provided shelter, but limited communication. Every natural feature could become a liability. Early walls traced ridges, crossed valleys, and hugged cliffs. They were inseparable from the land itself. This relationship between structure and terrain would define the Great Wall for centuries to come. By the late Warring States period, the concept of a continuous defensive line began to emerge. No longer isolated segments, walls started to connect. This was not yet the Great Wall, but the imagination of it had formed. Security was no longer local. It was strategic. Borders were no longer vague. They were engineered. When unification came, this idea would find unprecedented scale. The wall was waiting for an empire. The China that Qin Shi Huang inherited was scarred by centuries of conflict. The Warring States period had reduced cities to ash and populations to exhaustion. Victory no longer belonged to the virtuous or the wise, but to the ruthless and the organized. The state of Qin embodied this reality. Hardened by frontier warfare and guided by legalist philosophy, Qin valued discipline above mercy and order above tradition. Survival required obedience. When Yingzheng ascended the throne, he did not inherit peace. He inherited momentum. By 221 BCE, Yingzheng had achieved what generations before him had failed to do. He conquered the remaining states and declared himself Qin Shi Huangdi, the first emperor. This title was not symbolic. It marked a new political reality. China was no longer a collection of rival states. It was a single empire ruled by a single authority. Unification demanded more than conquest. It required permanence. With unification came vulnerability. Former rival states could no longer defend themselves independently. The northern frontier, long contested, became the responsibility of the central government. Nomadic groups such as the Xiongnu tested this new empire relentlessly. They did not challenge ideology or legitimacy. They challenged borders. Qin Shi Huang understood that an empire without secure boundaries was temporary. Rather than building from nothing, the Qin state did something unprecedented. It connected. Existing walls from the states of Qin, Zhao, and Yan were linked, extended, and reinforced. Earth was packed layer by layer between wooden frames. Stones were set where terrain allowed. This was not yet the stone wall known today. It was a vast earthen barrier stretching across mountains and deserts. For the first time, defense became imperial. The construction demanded unimaginable labor. Soldiers, peasants, convicts, and political prisoners were conscripted. Many never returned. Legends speak of bones buried within the wall. While poetic, these stories reflect real suffering. Harsh conditions, hunger, and exhaustion claimed countless lives. The wall became a monument not only to power, but to sacrifice. To Qin Shi Huang, the wall was more than defense. It was governance. It regulated movement, enforced taxation boundaries, and symbolized authority. Watchtowers allowed communication through smoke and fire. Roads followed the wall, enabling rapid troop movement. Architecture became an extension of law. The first emperor feared invasion, rebellion, and death itself. His obsession with immortality led to alchemical experiments and the construction of a massive mausoleum guarded by the terracotta army. The Great Wall belonged to this same impulse. To outlast chaos, to defy time. Yet the Qin dynasty collapsed shortly after his death. The Qin Wall did not save the dynasty, but it changed history. It established the idea that China's northern boundary could be engineered, that geography could be disciplined, that empire could be written across the land. Future dynasties would inherit this vision and reshape it. The Qin dynasty collapsed with shocking speed. Within a few years of Qin Shi Huang's death, rebellion swept across the empire. Harsh laws, forced labor, and centralized control had exhausted the population. When the dynasty fell in 206 BCE, the wall did not crumble with it. The earthen ramparts still cut across the land, silent witnesses to imperial ambition. Empires may fall quickly. Infrastructure does not. The Han dynasty emerged from chaos with a different governing philosophy. Confucian ideals tempered legalist severity, but pragmatism remained essential. The northern frontier was still dangerous. The Xiongnu Confederation had grown stronger, organized, and capable of sustained pressure. The Han rulers faced a choice: abandon the wall or adapt it. They chose continuity. Under the Han, the wall evolved from a single defensive line into a broader frontier system. Fortresses, beacon towers, garrisons, and supply depots were established along and beyond the wall. Roads connected these outposts, enabling trade and troop movement. The wall no longer merely blocked movement. It managed it. The Han did not rely solely on stone and earth. Military campaigns pushed deep into steppe territory. At the same time, diplomacy took center stage. The Hekin policy marriage alliances with nomadic leaders sought stability through kinship rather than conquest. The wall, in this context, became leverage rather than shield. One of the most profound transformations of the wall occurred through commerce. Under Emperor Wu of Han, China expanded westward. Trade routes opened, connecting China to Central Asia, the Middle East, and eventually Europe. The wall marked the threshold between inner China and the vast world beyond. Caravans passed through its gates, carrying silk, jade, horses, spices, and ideas. Defense gave way to exchange. Soldiers stationed along the frontier lived harsh, isolated lives. Letters recovered from desert outposts speak of homesickness, boredom, and fear. Farmers were settled near garrisons to supply food. Markets emerged. Families followed. The wall created communities as much as it created separation. As Han power waned, maintenance faltered. Sections eroded. Garrisons withdrew. Yet the concept endured. Later regimes repaired, extended, or repurposed the wall according to their needs. The wall was no longer a single project. It was a tradition. By the end of the Han dynasty, the wall had acquired layered meaning. It was no longer just a defense against nomads. It was a line of administration, trade, identity, and memory. The Great Wall was becoming something larger than any dynasty. After the fall of the Han dynasty, China entered a long period of political fragmentation. Kingdoms rose and fell rapidly. Authority fractured. Borders shifted with every generation. In this instability, the Great Wall lost its singular purpose. Without a unified empire, there could be no unified defense, yet the wall did not disappear. During the era of the three kingdoms and the subsequent northern and southern dynasties, China was effectively divided. Northern regimes, often founded by non-Han peoples, inherited frontier concerns. Southern dynasties, protected by rivers and mountains, focused inward. The wall became a regional concern rather than a national one. Xiangbai, Tuoba, and other northern groups who once lived beyond the wall now ruled lands within it. For them, the wall was no longer a barrier against outsiders. It was part of the territory they governed. This shift challenged traditional meanings of inside and outside. The wall ceased to be a civilizational boundary. It became historical infrastructure. Some regimes repaired sections of the wall. Others ignored it. Earth walls eroded. Watchtowers collapsed. Stones were reused in villages and fortifications, yet traces remained. Low ridges across plains, broken lines on mountain crests. Memory clung to the land even when power did not. Brief reunification under the Sui dynasty in the late 6th century revived large-scale wall construction. Facing threats from Turkic steppe powers, the Sui emperors ordered massive rebuilding efforts. Millions were conscripted. The human cost was immense. The wall returned as an imperial statement, but briefly. The Tang dynasty that followed adopted a different approach. Confident in military strength and diplomacy, Tang rulers relied less on walls. They projected power outward, forging alliances and dominating steppe politics. For a time, the Great Wall receded into the background of history. Even when neglected, the wall lived on in poetry, folklore, and historical writing. It symbolized endurance, hardship, and the limits of power. Poets wrote of soldiers stationed far from home, staring across endless horizons. The wall became metaphor. By the end of this era, the Great Wall had changed fundamentally. It was no longer a single strategic project. It was a palimpsest, layers of effort, ambition, and failure written across centuries. Its meaning adapted as China adapted. In the 13th century, a force emerged that rendered walls conceptually fragile. The Mongols, masters of mobility, coordination, and psychological warfare, crossed distances that stunned sedentary civilizations. They did not seek borders. They moved across them. For societies accustomed to fixed defenses, the Mongol approach posed a fundamental challenge. Speed replaced siege. Intelligence replaced attrition. The Great Wall faced an enemy that did not acknowledge its logic. The Mongol incursions exposed long-standing weaknesses along the northern frontier. Neglected sections of the wall offered little resistance. Garrisons were undermanned. Communication faltered. But more critically, the wall could not stop what it was not designed to confront: a decentralized, adaptive force that avoided direct confrontation when necessary. The wall slowed, diverted, and warned, but it could not decide the outcome. By 1271, Kublai Khan proclaimed the Yuan dynasty. For the first time, China was ruled by a power that had once been defined as external. The Great Wall did not fall. It became irrelevant. Under Mongol rule, the wall lost its purpose as a barrier. Trade routes expanded. Movement increased. The frontier dissolved administratively. What had once separated worlds now lay entirely within one. For the Yuan rulers, defense focused less on borders and more on internal control. Power flowed through roads, postal stations, and administrative networks. The wall became a historical artifact rather than a strategic asset. Its stones watched. Caravans passed freely where soldiers once stood. Guard. Chinese scholars and poets of the era began to reflect. Differently on the Great Wall, it became a symbol of lost sovereignty, but also of endurance. Some viewed it as a reminder of failed resistance. Others saw it as proof that no structure could permanently contain history. The wall's meaning fractured. Just as China's identity was being renegotiated, the Mongol period forced a reckoning. Walls could delay. They could signal. They could organize defense. But they could not replace diplomacy, intelligence, and adaptability. This lesson would profoundly shape the dynasty that followed. When Mongol rule weakened and rebellion grew, the Great Wall stood quiet. It had not been destroyed, but it had been bypassed conceptually and physically. Absence from strategic thinking became as important as its presence once had been. The next dynasty would remember this. When the Ming dynasty replaced the Yuan in 1368, memory guided policy. The Mongol conquest was not distant history. It was a living wound. The Ming founders understood that neglecting the northern frontier had consequences measured in centuries. Security would not be symbolic. It would be engineered. Unlike earlier dynasties that alternated between offense and diplomacy, the Ming adopted a sustained defensive posture. They chose containment over expansion. This decision reshaped the Great Wall, rather than earthen ramparts. The Ming built with brick and stone. Walls thickened. Towers multiplied. Passes were fortified into small cities. Defense became permanent. Ming engineers treated terrain as collaborator rather than obstacle. Walls climbed knife-edge ridges, crossed deserts, and anchored themselves to cliffs. Where mountains rose, the wall followed. Where plains opened, it reinforced itself with layered defenses moats, trenches, and garrisons. This was architecture in dialogue with geography. The Ming standardized construction techniques. Bricks were kill-fired and stamped with the names of officials responsible for quality. Stone blocks were precisely cut. Accountability was built into the wall. Roadways atop the wall allowed rapid troop movement. Parapets protected archers. Drainage systems prevented erosion. The wall became a machine. Hundreds of thousands of soldiers were stationed along the frontier. Many lived their entire lives within sight of the wall. Military colonies farmed nearby land to sustain garrisons. Families formed. Markets developed. The wall became a lived environment. Beacon towers enabled rapid communication across vast distances. Smoke by day and fire by night carried coded messages. An invasion could be reported hundreds of kilometers away within hours. Information became as vital as stone. Strategic passes such as Jiayuguan, Zhiyongguan, and Shanhaiguan evolved into monumental complexes. They controlled trade, migration, and military movement. Gates regulated entry into the empire. The Great Wall was no longer a line. It was a system. The scale of Ming construction demanded immense resources. Labor, materials, and taxation strained the state. Yet the wall held for centuries. It deterred large-scale invasions. It reshaped Mongol strategy. It bought time. What the world recognizes today as the Great Wall is largely Ming, its stone silhouettes against mountain skies define global imagination. It is not the oldest wall, but it is the most deliberate. The Great Wall is often imagined as empty, an unbroken line of stone stretching across silent mountains. This image erases the human reality that sustained it. For centuries, the wall was lived in, worked on, argued over, feared, and depended upon. It was not merely a defense. It was a society. Most soldiers stationed along the Ming Wall were not elite warriors. They were farmers in uniform, conscripts, or hereditary military households bound to service. Many arrived young and never left. Rotations were rare. Distance from the capital meant neglect and isolation. Letters and records described boredom, punctuated by terror. Days passed in routine drills and maintenance. Nights brought cold winds and imagined threats beyond the horizon. Contrary to popular belief, the wall was not populated solely by men. Military colonies encouraged soldiers to bring families. Wives cultivated fields. Children grew up measuring seasons by signal fires and patrols. Births, marriages, and funerals took place within sight of WATCHTOWERS. For these families, the wall was not symbolic. It was home. Women's labor sustained frontier life. They farmed, wove, cooked, repaired clothing, and raised children in harsh conditions. Their names rarely appear in records, yet without them, garrisons would have collapsed. Folk songs and local legends preserve fragments of their experience, waiting, endurance, and quiet resilience. Supplying the wall was a logistical challenge, rivaling its construction. Grain had to be transported across mountains and deserts. Corruption siphoned resources. Spoilage was common. During shortages, soldiers foraged or starved. The wall's strength depended as much on supply chains as on stone. Military law along the wall was strict. Desertion, negligence, or theft could bring severe punishment. Executions were public. Discipline was intended to deter fear, yet records also show mercy commands to reduce penalties during famine or harsh winters. Authority along the wall was absolute, but not blind. Life on the frontier encouraged belief. Shrines to local gods appeared near gates and towers. Soldiers prayed for safety, good harvests, and swift messages. The wall stood between known and unknown. Faith bridged the gap. Many frontier settlements faded after the Ming dynasty fell. Fields returned to grass. Houses collapsed, but traces remained: broken pottery, inscriptions. Graves. The wall remembers lives history forgot. Understanding life along the wall transforms it. From spectacle to story. It was built not only by emperors and generals, but by ordinary people whose lives unfolded in its shadow. Their endurance is the wall's quiet foundation. By the late 16th century, the Ming dynasty showed signs of exhaustion. The Great Wall still stood formidable, but its strength depended on the state behind it. Corruption spread through military ranks. Supplies were delayed or stolen. Garrisons went unpaid. Stone could not compensate for failing governance. The wall remained intact, yet discipline eroded. Watchtowers were undermanned. Signal systems failed through neglect rather than attack. Beyond the wall, new powers consolidated. The Jurchen tribes of the northeast, later known as the Manchus, unified under strong leadership. Unlike earlier nomadic forces, they combined mobility with organization and political vision. They studied the Ming system closely, its strengths and weaknesses. The wall did not intimidate them. It informed them. Maintaining the wall drained Ming resources. Taxes rose. Peasants rebelled. Climate instability brought drought and famine. Soldiers along the wall often lacked food and equipment. Some turned to smuggling or accepted bribes to survive. Defense became unsustainable. In 1644, the Great Wall did not fall by siege. It opened. At Shanhaiguan, one of the most heavily fortified passes. Ming General Wu Songui faced an impossible choice. Rebel forces threatened Beijing. Manchu armies waited beyond the wall. Wu opened the gates to the Manchus. This act ended the Ming dynasty and ushered in Qing rule. The Manchus crossed the wall not by force, but by invitation. The Great Wall had done its job physically. It failed politically. No wall can defend a state divided against itself. Under the Qing dynasty, the Great Wall lost strategic importance. The rulers themselves originated beyond it. Borders shifted northward. Defense relied on alliances, banners, and mobility. The wall became a relic of a previous era's anxieties. The Qing maintained some sections of the wall, but not as a primary defense. It served as an administrative boundary and historical reference, rather than a living military system. The empire no longer needed to hide behind stone. With the fall of the Ming, the Great Wall's role as China's shield effectively ended. It remained on the landscape, but not at the center of power. The age of walls was over. As the Qing dynasty consolidated power, the Great Wall slipped quietly into neglect. Without armies to man it or officials to maintain it, sections crumbled under wind, rain, and time. Villagers dismantled bricks to build homes. Earth walls melted back into the hills. What had once been guarded with lives became part of the landscape. History moved on, leaving stone behind. When European travelers reached China in the 17th and 18th centuries, the Great Wall captured their imagination. To outsiders, it appeared as proof of an ancient, mysterious civilization capable of extraordinary feats. Travel accounts exaggerated its scale, continuity, and purpose. The wall became myth before it became scholarship. In the 19th and early 20th centuries, China faced internal collapse and foreign intrusion. The Great Wall resurfaced in public consciousness, not as defense, but as identity. Reformers and revolutionaries invoked it as a symbol of endurance and unity. Painters, poets, and educators framed it as a collective achievement transcending dynasties. The wall no longer divided. It connected past and future. A persistent myth emerged claiming the Great Wall could be seen from space. While false, the belief reveals something deeper. People wanted the wall to be cosmic, to stand as evidence of humanity's capacity to mark the planet. The myth endured because it satisfied imagination more than fact. Modern governments began restoring sections of the wall for preservation and tourism. Decisions had to be made: restore faithfully or rebuild visibly. Some restorations preserved ruins. Others created smooth, walkable paths that never existed historically. The wall became both artifact and attraction. Millions now visit the Great Wall each year. Foot traffic erodes stone. Commercialization reshapes experience. Yet tourism also funds preservation and keeps the wall present in public consciousness. The challenge lies in balance access without erasure. Designated a UNESCO World Heritage Site, the Great Wall is now framed as belonging to humanity. This status offers protection, but also abstraction. The wall risks becoming symbol divorced from history. Remembering its complexity matters. The modern Great Wall exists in layers: ruin, reconstruction, symbol, and story. Each generation chooses which layer to emphasize. The wall survives not because it is whole, but because it is remembered. The Great Wall was never meant to be eternal. Its builders understood earth would erode, wood would rot, and even stone would fracture. What they sought instead was delay time to respond, time to prepare, time to survive. In this sense, the wall succeeded. It bought centuries. Impermanence was not failure. It was assumed God measured purely as a military structure. The Great Wall's record is mixed. It deterred some invasions, failed against others, and was often bypassed politically rather than physically. Yet judging it only by military success misses its deeper strength. The wall shaped governance, settlement, identity, and imagination. It structured how China thought about borders and belonging. Unlike monuments that dominate their surroundings, the Great Wall negotiates with them. It bends, climbs, and disappears in deserts. It dissolves into sand. In mountains, it becomes stone spine. In grasslands, it fades into memory. This adaptability is its quiet genius. Few structures expose labor as honestly as the Great Wall. Its uneven stones, varied materials, and discontinuities tell stories of urgency, shortage, and improvisation. It is not seamless because history is not. Every break records a decision, a failure, or a change in priority. The wall demonstrates both the reach and the limits of authority. States can mobilize millions. They can reshape terrain. They can leave marks visible from afar, but they cannot command loyalty forever, nor prevent internal collapse. The wall stands as evidence that power is real and temporary. What allows the Great Wall to endure is not stone, but relevance. As long as societies wrestle with security, borders, and identity, the wall remains legible. It speaks without instruction. Standing on the wall today, visitors confront scale without spectacle. There is no single vantage point from which it can be fully grasped. That understanding comes slowly, through walking, pausing, and imagining. The wall teaches patience. Though rooted in Chinese history, the Great Wall belongs to global reflection. It asks universal questions. How do societies protect themselves? What do they fear? What do they build when fear becomes policy? Few answers endure. The questions do. The Great Wall does not promise permanence. It promises memory. Long after empires fall and borders shift, its fragments remain, asking future generations to consider what is worth defending and at what cost. The Great Wall survives not as the triumph of rulers, but as a chronicle of humanity. It bears witness to ambition, fear, sacrifice, and imagination. Stones stacked by hands long gone now mark the passage of empires, each layer telling a different story. Every fractured brick, every eroded earthen rampart, every watchtower tells of lives lived in the shadow of vigilance. Soldiers marched, families toiled, laborers carried earth and stone through heat, wind, and snow. Their presence is etched invisibly in the rhythm of the wall. The Great Wall instructs silently. It teaches patience, endurance, and humility. It reminds us that no matter how high or long, walls cannot hold back time, change, or human will. Yet walls endure in memory because people care to remember, preserve, and interpret them. Walking along its mountains, one cannot see the wall's entirety. It stretches, bends, and vanishes beyond sight. Understanding comes from immersion, from stepping carefully, looking closely, and imagining centuries of human struggle. The wall asks not for conquest, but for contemplation. The Great Wall compels us to ask, how do societies defend themselves? What is worth protecting? What do we build when fear shapes policy? Answers are never final, but the questions endure, whispered across ridges, deserts, and grasslands. In the end, the Great Wall exists in layers: earth, stone, memory, myth, and imagination. It is simultaneously ruin and achievement, local and universal. It is history written in terrain, labor, and vigilance, calling on every observer to reflect on impermanence, resilience, and human legacy. The wall does not dominate. It participates. It listens to wind, shadow, and footsteps. Its lesson is subtle yet profound. Permanence is never guaranteed, but meaning can be eternal.